wanted to talk about, we've kind of battled a little bit with what we wanted to do with this time. You know, we want to talk about, you know, interview skills. We want to talk about, you know, ways to optimize your internship. There were tons of things that we could have covered, but essentially the underlying theme amongst all those things was really how to optimize your experience and how to kind of market yourself. So we really kind of wanted to set 3 different scenarios in a presentation setting, on your resume, and then in your overall personal interaction with the best ways or our tips on how to market yourself to the best of your abilities. Obviously, you all are very intelligent and smart, and you've come packed with tons of skills, but we want to make sure that from the HR side, when you're talking to someone, a recruiter, or you're in that behavioral interview, or you're at an internship, that you really can express those skills in a way that's going to easily translate for someone who may not have the same set of skills as you do. So that's kind of the goal for today. So the first thing we wanted to talk, this is kind of us setting the theory and the tone of what we want to do today. Obviously, your resume opens the door for you, but we want to know, you know, what happens when you walk into the room. So you have a stellar resume, and we'll talk about ways to get your resume up to that standpoint. But once you're there and once you're in a room, how do you really make sure all of those skills translate and come to life in your day-to-day activities on the job or in an internship? So starting off with what your skills specifically are, we want to make sure that everything that you've learned in your education and your educational background is really going to be able to, like I said, translate into something that's going to be edible for a recruiter. So the WIFM is the what's in it for me. I joked with Susan earlier this morning, telling her that my mom always talked to me about what's the WIFM, and she was, you know, it was in a day-to-day activity. I would, Mom, can I go to a movie? And she would ask me what the WIFM was around, like why she should let me do something. But essentially, that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, why should an employer let you do something? You know, what do you offer that's going to be good for them? When I'm looking at a resume, when I'm talking to you in conversation, what's the WIFM for the employer? And the best way to kind of figure out what that is for you to start to think like an employer.
And just to interject, in a real life example, Lindsay and I have a request from a hiring manager who is looking for an analyst, and it's off cycle for a campus recruiting. Of course, they need the person right now. So Lindsay and I were just sitting and we were brainstorming around what interns did we have that maybe are looking maybe 1 or 2 years out, and we've pulled up their resumes, and what we're finding is their resumes don't reflect how good they were at their internship, and that's what we don't want to have happen for you if we can caution you in any way. You have to make sure that that resume is a true reflection of who you are, because we're worried with one of these resumes, although the person had a stellar internship, that the hiring manager is going to look at the resume and say, no, it's not, this is not what I'm looking for. So we're going to end up having to back it up with some verbatims from the individual's manager from her summer internship experience. Right. But you don't always have Susan and Lindsay trying to figure out how do I best market this individual for this job.
Right.
In fact, you rarely will have Susan and Lindsay unless you come to work at
right, unless you come to Pitney Bowes. So essentially, you know, thinking about that, what's in it for me, you know, that's what the employer is saying. You really want to make sure that you really fully understand what you have to offer. So really taking inventory of what your skills are and then figuring out how to explain them. And this is before you even really sit down and start to reevaluate your resume. You know, like we talked about earlier, you guys are master's students, you know, really intelligent undergraduate students. You know what skills you have, but we really want to talk about how you can translate those skills into conversation. So understanding, you know, taking inventory of what you offer and then figuring out how to explain it. So often when we come to CMU, obviously a lot of your backgrounds are more in a technical kind of setting. You know, lots of engineers, lots of computer science majors, even design, you know, majors and fine arts majors that have some type of technical underlying. Often, you know, we'll be at a career fair and I'll have a student who's telling me a lot, but I don't understand much of what they're saying at all, because it's just on a level of, you know, knowledge base that I don't necessarily have myself. So we wanted to make sure that when we spoke to you all today, that we were giving you kind of categories on how to really place your skills, making sure that when you're talking to employers, you're telling them what your technical skills are, you're really giving them an example of what your functional skill set is, and then also giving off a sense of what your soft skills, your people skills are. So I just wanted to kind of break down your skill type into categories so that when you're working on your resume, You want to make sure that you're not top heavy in any of those settings. You know, you want to make sure that it's not purely technical, because if you send it to me, you know, it'll say a lot of great things, but I won't necessarily be sure how to translate that to a hiring manager. Often the first line that you're going to meet in a company is going to be someone from the human resources department. And while we're really smart people, we don't always have the same computer science background or et cetera kind of background that you may have. So you want to make sure that when you're thinking about your skill set and starting to think about how you're going to market that you're finding examples within all of these categories. So a technical skill set may be that you have, you know, CS knowledge, or you understand Java or something like that. A functional skill set may be that you work very well with people, you know, you understand how to analyze data, or you've managed a team, something more functional in a transferable skill. And then your soft skills, you know, that you're a confident person, that you enjoy interaction with other individuals, more of those kind of one-on-one human interaction kind of skills. So when you think about your resume and when you think about what your strengths are, I would charge you all to be sure that you can kind of communicate something in each of those categories in a clear and concise way. You know, when I was thinking about the presentation, we wanted to make sure we were tailoring it to the audience. So thinking about some skills that you all may have, that you may not know you have already, that are really important to employers. You know, things like working well under tight deadlines. You know, things like being easily adaptable. Those are skills that students, college students, master's students have and probably take for granted a little bit, but really are helpful in the workplace. And we want to make sure that employer understands that you know that you have them, and you know that it can be one of the WIFM things for them to take away.
And to back that up, as Pitney Bowes, our own company is going through a huge transformation right now with a new chairman that came in. And as an executive, head of executive recruiting and looking at resumes, it makes me a little nervous when I've seen somebody that's been with the same organization for a long time and think, how well can they deal with change? So it's really important, as they're explaining in their resume, what types of transformation have gone on in those particular organizations. So they may in fact be much more flexible and adaptable to change than someone who's been at 4 companies in the past 10 years as opposed to being with one company for the past 15. But it's important to see those culled out as skill set that you have.
Right. Are there any questions about that, or any ideas that you all have that you might think that, you know, a college student or a master's student may have as a skill and not really know that it's a skill? Any kind of questions around that? If not, it's okay. Okay. So we have some other examples of kind of ways to highlight those skills. After you understand what they are, of course, you want to make sure that you can put them down on paper in a way that's going to, like we said, translate to the employer. And that's really what you can do in a resume. So you understand what your skills are, you know, you've been in school, you take an inventory of your personal skills, you kind of categorize them. I know what my technical skills are, I know what my functional skills are. And then you want to put it on paper in a way that's kind of going to be a snapshot of all those things for an employer. And a resume, we talk about resumes all the time. They're probably one of the most important pieces of, you know, paper that you can create for yourself. And you can put a lot of words on there, but at the end of the day, it's not going to speak for you. So you want to make sure that if you're putting something down on paper, that you're explaining it in a way that aligns with those categories and that really highlights the WIFM for the employer. Because, you know, at a career fair, we have the luxury of speaking with you. Often a student will hand me a resume, and I'll glance at it and then put it down because I have the person in front of me. You know, that's the real live thing. But after you leave, I am only left with that resume and that piece of paper to reflect who you are. So we want to make sure that you make it as dynamic as possible and that it speaks to, as much as it can, all the different things that an employer is looking for.
Just to stop before you get into this slide. Another thing with your resume, as you said, being a dynamic document, you should be changing it and updating it all the time. So if you go through you know, a terrific class project, or you're working on a capstone project and working with a particular company, update it as you go so that it resonates and stays with you. In fact, I always tell my team, I said, you know, be certain to update your resume at the same time you're doing the performance appraisal, because you're being very reflective at that time. And not that I ever want Lindsay to work anywhere else, but the last thing you want to do is to not look at your resume in 3 years and think, oh, what have I accomplished? So as you're going through and having those experiences, I know you have a lot on your plate, but try to capture it on your resume so that it continues to evolve. And then when you talk with recruiters, actually it's kind of cool to say, oh, well, that's my resume from last fall. Let me give you the updated version from February, and think, wow, they've done this much in this much time.
Right.
It's impressive to us.
And at the end of the day, you know, I want to make sure that we keep this on topic. A resume is your #1 marketing tool. You know, when you're talking about marketing yourself, you can do a lot when you're in person, and then that's probably what the bulk of the presentation is going to be about. But like we said in the beginning, we want to talk about opening the door first, and your resume is the tool that's going to do that. So when and obviously you all know that, of course, but we want to really talk about specific examples. So I kind of wanted to drill down a little bit and figure out how we can talk about optimizing the resume to the best of your ability. As employers, you know, we're always looking for some key characteristics within an individual. When we say commitment, that really, to me, means that you're dedicated to something. You know, you're committed to something. So that could be something as simple as you've been in a club for multiple years and you're showing growth within that club. It could be something as, you know, dynamic as you face a challenge within a role, but you were committing to solving it. And those are things that you really usually talk about, but there are ways you can definitely translate that on paper within a resume. So rather than just saying, and we'll get into more examples of, you know, what you could say and what you should say, but rather than just saying, you know, I turned around the operations of such and such system, you know, that's something, or you can say rather, I optimized the operations of a system. But I would probably rather see that you turned it around from something and you were committed to making it better. So as an example of commitment. Kind of going the extra mile falls along those same lines. Wearing multiple hats. Obviously not everyone can be a jack of all trades, but you do want to show that you're easily adaptable and that you can change your skill set to fit in different things. Susan and I talk about that a lot, and I actually really like the way she just explained it in terms of your personal role, you know, wearing multiple hats. If you're an executive recruiter and you also work on an employee value proposition, employee branding, and you also have campus recruitment, those are multiple hats, but putting it in a case like you just did when you introduce yourself, saying that it's kind of the career journey in a job, you know, that shows different things that you can do and your experience from entry level to manager.
Sometimes your title can be limited. So it may say, we actually were just talking about that at lunch, that you know, the title may not be attractive to you, or it might not be indicative of what all you're doing. So you want to make certain that it's fleshed out. Right.
Obviously maintaining a positive attitude. Now, how do you do that on paper? It's all about tone. It's about the way that you talk about something. It's about the way that you describe it, the detail you go into. You know, everyone's read an email where the tone has fallen flat a little bit, or where you're not sure how that person feels. And that's just a matter of word choice and things like that that we can do to really optimize your resume so that it can speak for you as much as it possibly can. Opportunities, showing opportunities where you were a decision maker, showing things that you were passionate about. You know, oftentimes we find with students, and Susan has a good example of this, where you may pick to represent a club or a leadership example that you're involved in because you think that it is the dynamic thing rather than talking about what you've done that's dynamic. So your example that you gave earlier today, I think.
Yeah, I just said that you may put that you're a member of the technology club, and you can be very general with that. But actually, you were in, and there's a lot of great clubs here at Carnegie Mellon, but I'm thinking like one of the a cappella groups or something, and that you started as a freshman, and you continued to do it, and you became one of the leaders and decision makers in it. You might think, oh well, that doesn't really speak to a corporate. I'd rather talk about being in a technology club. But we'd rather see that you were dedicated to something and that you build upon it and that it was important to you.
Something that you're passionate about, you're going to speak to with passion. Something that you're not so passionate about, you're going to speak to just as a thing that you did. So making sure that you kind of make sure you pump up your resume with those things as well. Obviously being organized, and that's physically organized on paper. You know, a resume that's nice to look at is going to be read more than one that isn't. So make those little details, making sure your bullet points are aligned. That all really reflects your individual character, I think, on paper, because that's all we have. Showing that you're dependable, your overall communication that's written in this case, and then being conscientious and detail-oriented, of course, as well throughout the resume. So these are things that we're looking for, and if you can have your resume speak to those things, it's going to replace you personally speaking to those things and open that door for you that we talked about earlier today. So if you consider your resume your personal billboard, you want to make sure that it has the best messages possible. So we wanted to give some examples of things that we may see on a resume and ways that we can kind of pump in some of those key characteristics and categories that we talked about just in the past slide. So, The one-liners on resumes, daily processing of portfolio transactions in accordance with department policies and procedures. That's a real example. I'm not really sure what that means exactly, but you'll see things like this on a resume, and you as a person know exactly what you meant and what you were trying to say, but us as a reader, it doesn't really say anything about your passion or really show any growth, or that you're, that you can wear multiple hats or anything like that. So we wanted to give an example of a way to optimize that sentence in itself. So changing something like the first bullet to the second bullet, provide investment managers and clients with accurate, time-sensitive portfolio information through diligent processing, analysis, reporting, and dissemination of cash and transaction data. Now that's a longer sentence, but it says a few things. It says that you're client-focused. It says that you can meet deadlines. It says that you're detail-oriented. It says that someone had some level of trust in you, so that you can, that you could handle these cash transactions and data. And it gives me a more dynamic view of your overall experience there. I think that, this is an example of ways that you could optimize a sentence like that. Do you guys kind of see the differences between the two? I mean, just something to think about there. Another example around that, often, if you have that section that's like skills and other opportunities or other activities that you've done, you'll see things like organized, profitable, and charitable events, which is a nice thing. And of course, that means that you've done something outside of your job kind of, responsibilities maybe, but there's a lot more that you can say there. Putting some type of quantifiable value, organized and ran for-profit and charity events attracting more than 45 musicians of regional, national, international influence in an avant-garde genre. I see scope there, I see numbers there, things like that would really kind of give a more full picture of what you're trying to do. And at the end of the day, this is about marketing yourself. So you want to make sure that, obviously it's difficult for some of us to brag. This may seem a little bit, extra, going the extra mile, but that's something that you want to do because you're not there to speak to it yourself. And Susan made a great point earlier today. If you ran something like this, or if you did something with a profitable or non-profitable kind of activity, you want to put the name of the name of the company too, or the name of the organization as well, because you never know what will resonate with a recruiter. And at the end of the day, we're all people, and those personal kind of connections really do go a long way.
So if you did, if you did something for autism, mention that. If you did something for, I'm involved with Guiding Eyes for the Blind, which we train puppies to become service dogs. And if you mention the name, if you don't know how many, my LinkedIn profile is one of the top most visited ones at Pitney Bowes. Mm-hmm. I get more people asking me about my Guiding Eyes work than I do anything else. Because people go, oh, isn't that great? And they remember it, and then ask me about it. And actually, I can talk about it, how it impacts my family, how it impacts my work, and I can blow that out a bit. It's not just something that I do for fun, but I have a great story that goes around that.
Right. And even if we don't know what that is, for instance, if I saw Guiding Eyes and I didn't know what that was, as a recruiter, maybe I might be interested in finding more about it. If I presented myself that way, and let's take the recruiter or non-recruiter kind of hat out of it, right? Just as individuals, if I have something that you want and I tell you something about myself, it's probably going to prompt you to find out what that thing is because you want to connect with me on some level, right? So in this case, it's a job, but in any other case, it may be something else. If it's something that maybe it sounds interesting or sounds unique, you want to provide opportunities for people to dig and do research about you, because that means that you're marketing yourself in a positive way.
And you'll be more memorable. I mean,
right.
You're most likely going to talk to a whole lot of people who've done similar things. But they may remember you for something unique that you did. And also, it's a great opportunity to show your passion, as you said. Right.
So then we wanted to get into, and these examples, thinking about the folks in the room, you guys are definitely more, for the most part, more senior when it comes to your experience level, especially because there's a lot of master's students here. But we wanted to give some examples to try to do a little bit of an interactive thing here about things that we kind of see on resumes, and to see if you guys can kind of jog your thoughts a little bit around ways that we could optimize some of these things. So if I have any volunteers, that would be a great thing. But if you saw something like...
If not, I'll talk more.
Right, talk more about it.
Yeah, listen to me all the time.
When you see something like operated the cash register at an ice cream shop, does anyone have any kind of things you could... I mean, we see these things, obviously. It's something that you did and something you're probably really proud of. Does anyone have any ideas around how you could blow that out a little bit? Sure.
You talk about how you interact with customers every day, how you actually had
Right, absolutely. Anything else to support that? Susan has a pretty good example around that.
This is actually a real life example, and I talked to this individual, and they were an accounting major, and so they thought, that working the cash register, balancing the cash register at the end of the day would be a good thing for accounting. And as I talked to the individual, what I found out is they had worked there since they were maybe a junior in high school, and had been, basically by the time they were done with this summer job, they were managing and hiring the entire staff for the summer and training them. And I'm like, that's what we want to see on a resume. The shop owner empowered you to hire everyone and train them. That really says a whole lot about you as an individual, as a leader. It ended up changing it, and it just very impactful. In fact, she even asked me, should I even put that on there? And I said, well, let's talk more about it. That's actually where we started, because I was like, no, probably not where we want to be. And then as we talked, I'm like, no, okay, this is something that's really important, the fact that they gave you this responsibility.
Right. The other example that I thought of was a counselor at Chimney Corners summer camp. Anyone have anything you could pump into that? Sure.
Well, there's a time value associated with that, presumably, so you could say how you guided participants through that event, or like what sort of development you oversaw or encouraged.
Absolutely. This is a real life example too, and I actually changed it to try to show one good thing is that I put the name of the summer camp. My sister went to Chimney Corners summer camp. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it. The brother's camp is Beckett, Camp Beckett. It's in Massachusetts, and she showed me a resume and it had something like that, counselor at my summer camp or something. But there was this huge story behind that. She started off as a camper there. She became an aide there, which is like a junior counselor. Then she became a junior counselor. Then she was a senior counselor, and now she's training the counselors and things like that. I mean, that's showing commitment. That's showing dedication. It's showing personal growth. And it's throwing the name out there. It's presenting an opportunity for her to connect with someone who may have also gone to the camp or whose children might go to the camp. So really, speaking about the full journey and the story behind an experience rather than just saying the experience itself. And then the last example we thought of was just kind of, learned customer service in a retail business. I'll kind of speak to that one a little bit. Often folks think that, okay, it's retail, customer service, I said that, and that's kind of presented everything that I want to say about it. Before my internship at Pitney Bowes, I worked at I probably worked at every store in the mall. And I kind of categorize my experiences at all of them as the same, but they really were very individual experiences. I was learning about a brand. I was learning about how to communicate a brand. I was learning about marketing that brand. I was learning about the overall kind of supply chain aspect behind it. Way more things than I thought than just really being in a retail store and folding clothes. So just making sure that when you're thinking about your resume and you're looking about ways to optimize it and to have it speak for you, that you're really telling the full story behind it and pumping in as much information, considering those categories and those skill sets that we talked about in the beginning as much as possible. Any questions around overall how to market yourself on paper in a resume? Yeah, sure.
So you think this is how we should change our resume, not how we should speak about it?
I think, right. I mean, we're going to get into more how to speak about it in the next couple of slides, but I think that if you want to talk about opening that door, oftentimes, the resume is going to be the thing to do that. So before you even have an opportunity to speak to an employer, or before you even get to the internship, you're going to be a piece of paper for a little while at least. So we wanted to make sure we set the foundation of how to even get the door open before we get into really how to speak about it. I think that if you have any questions around something specific, we can definitely use that before we even go on. If it's something about a technical skill or something that you can kind of translate. Sure. Yeah, I think functional skills in terms of managing people and overall those kind of things. Is that what you're speaking of?
Yeah, she asked something about the transition from one job to another.
Transitioning from one job to another.
She mentioned if we have worked at one place for 10 years, we should be transitions and we work with it.
But more like transitions within the working environment. So what I was speaking to is that there was a major acquisition that came into your organization. I'm thinking of people I've been interviewing from Merck lately. Merck has gone through, they've acquired so many companies and now they've been acquired and spun off. So although these individuals have been at Merck for a long time, the company has changed very much, and as did the role of the individual. So
Right.
And so being able to look at that and kind of telling the story of whether you were leading a project group or project team, those types of experiences.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you think about being on your resume, right, oftentimes you can speak a lot to what you did and how something changed. But I think also kind of speaking, you know, if you had 3 bullet points under a topic and you talk about this is what I did, this is how I changed something, that last point talking about what you're taking away from that experience really lets me know what you're coming to our company with. So I think that sometimes people shy away from the personal development point a little bit, or the skill set development point, but that really is a functional transferable skill that outside of the context of the current job and the current company that you're with, that you're going to bring to our company as well. And I often look for that, especially with student resumes, because the experience is more so school-based, or you're working in a department in the school or something like that. So it's, you know, what did you take away from that? What's the transferable skill? Did you train people? Did you kind of learn an organizational structure or something like that that you're to really bring to a corporate environment? And a lot of times it's difficult for people to talk about that because it's not something that you think about when you think corporate, you think technical, you know, skills, this is what I can do, but not more so like how you can do it and what you're going to change and how you're going to adapt into a new environment, a new company. Does that kind of answer the question? So then going on to really how we speak. This is like I said in the beginning, it's a little bit, not necessarily basic, but it's kind of more fundamental in nature, the way we want to talk about it. I think that oftentimes, like we said in the beginning, you know what you can do. You've done it at school, you've learned about things like that. And this is really the how to speak, I think, a little bit. You know, obviously, the key point is like what you say is equally important to how you say it. Oftentimes, the first interaction you're going to have is in an interview setting or at a career fair. And there are some things that we think are fundamental that we kind of lose track a little bit of when we start to get deep into the technical nature of our work or the nuances that are specific to what we do. So in terms of verbal communication, and we split this up into verbal and nonverbal, these are things that everyone thinks they know, but kind of forget when they start to speak to other people. These are the 3 big things: your volume, your clarity, and your appropriateness. Now, it may seem a little bit basic, like I said, in nature, but when you sit down, there are examples here when we talk about volume. People always think that it's the turning your volume down, speaking too quietly in things. But I can tell you it's always specifically alarming when someone's literally screaming at you and they don't know it, And so then, therefore, everything that they say is kind of being lost in the fact that you're really being projected at. Sometimes, you want to tailor that to your audience. Obviously, if I was here talking to you all and I suddenly just started talking like this, I'm still speaking very clearly, but you probably can't hear me all the way in the back. I'm gonna lose you, But if I was standing here and I was screaming, that's gonna distract you. So kind of, when you're thinking about marketing yourself, you want to also think about marketing your behaviors and your, physical attitude as well. Obviously, of course, clarity, and I say that in terms of physical speech and then also what you're saying. So if I said to you all that on a day-to-day basis in human resources, I work in various systems, including Taleo, SharePoint, and Adobe Design. Maybe you'll get Adobe Design, but you probably don't know what SharePoint maybe is from a business setting, and you probably don't know what Taleo is. So when I speak about clarity, I speak about really, making sure you define what you're talking about for your audience. So instead of just saying I work in Taleo, I would probably say, on a day-to-day basis, I interact with Taleo, which is our applicant tracking system, and it allows me to kind of measure out the applicants that I'm receiving per job and kind of go the extra step and go the extra mile to be sure that you're explaining what you're talking about. In a corporate setting, it's always funny because
acronyms.
Yeah,
they ask the acronyms, and that happens at campus too. Like, if you have an abbreviation for one of the majors, because it seems here there's a lot of some of them have a very long title, so you refer to them by the acronym, but we don't know what that is necessarily. And so we have to say, is this what you meant? And it tends to throw the candidate off. And they think, oh, well, everyone knows what that means here.
Right.
And that also happens just within any corporate company. You have to go through and look through for all of your acronyms and take them out and explain them. And
that's kind of the similarity with clarity and what I meant by appropriateness a little bit. So speaking about your experience and using acronyms, if you said something to me, you know, I'm in ECE or some kind of major, and I said, oh, what does that mean? All of a sudden now, someone's on the defense. It throws off the conversation a little bit. Because even if I didn't mean to offend or question you, now all of a sudden, you know, now you're thrown off, you're nervous. So being sure that when you're speaking about your activities and your kind of certifications and what you bring to the table, that you're tailoring it to your audience, I think is just a huge thing that people forget because they're kind of in a zone when you're talking about verbal communication. Any questions around what we meant around that? So those would be three big things to remember when marketing yourself. And then obviously, of course, the nonverbal communication bits as well. Your gestures, your overall, you know, way to adjust yourself, and then those self-checks. So, like I said, seems fundamental, but if I was standing here and I just found myself like this, which is my natural stance, talking to you all, it's definitely distracting and probably not as welcoming as I'm trying to be. You know, if I started to gesture and I was doing things like this and like this, but not talking about anything over here, or if I just started pointing to Susan as I'm talking just randomly, which people probably don't realize that they do, or standing with their hands in their pockets and things like that. If you're trying to market your skills, you want to make sure you're giving us something sleek and purposeful to look at. It's just like when you see a commercial, it's always odd when a whole commercial goes by and you have no idea what it was about or what it was for. It's a similar thing with your nonverbal communications. They should be purposeful. You know, they should prove a point. They should emphasize a point, and that's probably it. So that's kind of the things what I wanted to mention to you all around your gestures. Obviously, of course, adjusting your behavior when it comes to speaking with someone one-on-one. What you say, is important. How you say it is important. So if I'm Go ahead.
No, I was also going to say you want to be able to look at your interviewer or
right.
the individual at the career fair and notice how they are taking in what you're saying. So if you feel like they're not paying attention to me, or they seem to be backing off, maybe I'm talking too loud, they're leaning in and asking for clarification, maybe they're not following what I'm having to say. So definitely be able to adjust your style based upon who it is that you're talking to. And quite frankly, you may end up, if you're talking with someone who's very technical and just graduated from the same program that you were in a year ago, you can go really deep on the technical stuff and know that you're all on the same page. So you can really adjust based on who it is that you're talking to.
Right. So just tying this back in again before we keep going, you've understood your skills, you put them on paper, now you're speaking to them. You want to make sure that nothing that you're doing to speak to your skills in your resume is distracting from all the work you just did to get it on paper in that ideal way. And then, so now you're in the door, essentially, right? You've gone through the resume process, you've optimized your resume, you've spoken to a person either in an interview setting or at a career fair setting, or just, an ad hoc kind of basis. And we really want to talk about what you're doing, how you show what you've got once you've actually got it. So you've either gone through an internship experience, or you're at your job full time, and you have an opportunity to do a presentation. So now we wanted to talk about some ways to optimize and market your skills in a presentation setting. And in this case, I'm talking more like a presentation like this, but obviously you want to make sure you understand what the delivery is going to be as well. So all the things we talked about in terms of delivery, you want to make sure you carry on, and then we also want to talk about your content and visual design. At the end of the day, any presentation you give is really the sum of all those three things. If you take away one of them, you really are lacking a huge thing. If I was really great at kind of what I had on the slide and how it looked, but I stood here and I forgot all of those nonverbal and verbal communication skills, it's really going to take away from the presentation, of course. And therefore, my marketing value has dropped significantly. If I stood up here and I had an awesome delivery and beautiful dynamic designs, but they had not much valuable information for you, that's going to make me fall short as well. So we wanted to talk about your content and visual design as well. Obviously, when it comes to the visuals, if you're a fine arts major and you're great with PowerPoint, that's going to come naturally to you, but oftentimes we're not. So we really wanted to talk about 6 key things that you want to make sure you can keep in mind when you're doing a presentation. Slides really aren't documents. That kind of gets lost for some people often. There shouldn't be tons and tons of context on the slide. There should be unity within the design. You should keep it as concise as possible. Obviously, you want your data to be clearly displayed. Multimedia in class is cool, and animations and stuff like that is really great, but in a corporate setting it really can become dizzying, and you really want to just keep it as simple and purposeful as possible. And then obviously don't forget the audience. So when it comes to presenting the slide or delivering this information, this should really be a backup for you. You know what you've done, you know what you bring to the table, and if you're marketing yourself well, you want everyone to know that as well, not just that you can make an awesome PowerPoint. So you want to make sure you're speaking to the audience, not to the slide. There's been tons of times in meetings and things like that where we'll see someone speak and they're doing their whole presentation like this, and their audience then becomes the screen behind them rather than the people in front of them, and I'm more so concentrating on that than what they're saying. So we wanted to make sure we made those key 3 points around visuals. And then I wanted to give you an example from a real life example from a deck that I'm actually working on right now. At Pitney Bowes, we're really in the process of transformation, I think, as a company. Definitely going from more of a mailing technologies company to a software company, a technical based company, moving out of just our 93-year-old history into more of the modern day. So we needed to make sure that we had an employee value proposition that's doing the same thing, maintaining our culture, but also showing all the new things that we can offer to the individuals. So that's something that we're working on personally at work. And this is a slide that I was working on that was supposed to explain some of the things that we're doing when it comes to redesigning our career site so that it aligns with our new employee value proposition that we're developing as well.
But she got feedback that she should change that.
Right, so this was a slide as it started. At the end of the day, it's kind of an essay. It's not visually exciting. It doesn't really, you can't, if you wanted to look for something specific, you probably would have to read through the whole thing to find it. And this slide was specifically it was going to be walked through. It wasn't a presentation slide. It was going to be delivered to someone kind of as an info deck for them to have. So in general, I would want to show you how this slide should look if it's being presented to someone physically, and then how it should look if you're actually doing a physical presentation. So we changed this to look like this, more visually stimulating, easily broken down into little bits of information rather than just having a long thing. If I wanted to find out what a general redesign is going to do based off of our EVP, I can go straight there. If I wanted to talk more technical, I can go to the bottom. We really wanted to break down all of this information that's here. And then we wanted to show you how it would look if it was doing a presentation. This would never be in a presentation format. It would still be too much to kind of digest. But if I was doing a physical presentation in front of my group, you probably would only see an image. This is our current career site. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to it. I'm going to be able to stand here and explain the things we want to change, the areas that we want to listen to, that we want to concentrate on, and I'm probably just going to show a visual, especially in a corporate setting like Pitney Bowes, where it's death by slides. In any company, it's death by slides. I mean, you watch PowerPoints all day, so you want to make sure that something that you do is going to be dynamic and different. I probably would just show an image of something that we have and something that we want to lead towards. The Walmart sites, it's more technically advanced, or these are the technical things we want to pull from, and this is the category, how we want to break down our categories, and give an example visually rather than showing all of this even in a setting. Now, what that does is just allows the audience to digest it a little bit easier, and at the end of the day, coming out of this specific example, even at work, you're marketing yourself every day. If I can stand in front of a slide and knowledgeably talk about what I'm doing, it's gonna prove way more confident, and my reliability and everything about me is gonna come across from me rather than just a slide behind me. And that's on a day-to-day basis at work, because you're always, at the end of the day, proving and marketing yourself daily.
And interestingly enough, sometimes the presentation can be very different from the individual themselves, and where you don't want to have it happen is you don't want to then have a negative reflection upon you. So
right, absolutely, and that happens a lot.
And it's also nice when you see the other side, like, wow, that person doesn't normally impress me, but it's a really good presentation.
Right, absolutely. So those are some of the things we wanted to talk about in terms of visually. Then this is from the same slide deck, actually, in terms of your content. You don't think always that marketing yourself has to do with the things that you produce on paper, but it really does. This is an example of a slide that I made from the same deck. As you can see, it barely fits on the screen. It's way wordy. Lots of things that are there, things that I'm personally working on a day-to-day basis to try to change. So we really changed this slide, looking at the poll survey specifically. Tons of information there. everyone internally knows what a pulse survey is. So we can really cut something like that down to something way more neat. I can fit a title on the slide. You know, it's easily digestible there. So kind of coming to wrap things up a little bit, we wanted to talk about the 3 different things we talked about. So we talked about your resume, that's marketing yourself on paper. We talked about your physical communication, your verbal communication, that's marketing yourself on a one-to-one basis. And then we wanted to talk about how you market the work that you do in a presentation. At the end of the day, your resume is going to open the door, you know, but what are people really going to remember when you leave the room? I think that, you know, these little things, these fundamental things, we tend to forget. Because we're so heavily focused on telling people this is what I've done, this is all, you know, the little technical things that I can do, these little nuanced things that I can do, but we forget really how to communicate those things. And at the end of the day, even if I stood here and just smiled at you guys for an hour, you probably would remember that more than, you know, than me not doing something like that. So really we wanted to highlight those things. You know, we talked about really understanding who you are. We actually just went through an exercise at work where we went through different personality assessments, you know, whether you're a warrior, you know, the expert or the mastermind, and how each of those things have their own little quirks and nuances about them. Susan and I both happen to be masterminds, which means that we have these really great ideas and these huge kind of dreams and possibilities, but we kind of throw them out there and then can get easily distracted. So in meetings, often the 2 of us both being that way and her being my manager, you know, if we don't have an agenda, we tend to just talk about everything and kind of just flow. So we have an agenda. So understanding when it comes to marketing yourself, the first step is really, like we said, understanding who you are.
And understanding your audience too.
And understanding your audience as well. So if you all were, you know, the same type of thinkers as we are, we probably would be talking about, you know, something completely different by this point. You know, maybe we'd be talking about sports, I'm not sure. But essentially, you know, equipping yourself with the tools that you need to market yourself the best that you possibly can comes first with understanding who you actually are as to the best of your ability. Obviously, we're all growing and developing, but if you know what your skills are, and if you know how to kind of categorize them and put them down on paper, it'll really help when it comes to translating those things to other people. That's pretty much what we wanted to really share with you all, and obviously we wanted to open up for any questions and any specific examples that we can kind of help you all work through if you have any questions. Sure.
Okay. So I guess this is more of a personal part of the reason I'm here at this presentation. I've been told I have a lot of great things to offer, but I don't really show them with enthusiasm. I don't really express myself with the passion that I should. And I was hoping you could tell me what sort of thinking process, what sort of process you should go through, or like what you should prep yourself to really be able to convey the passion you have for something.
I think that's a great question, and I actually immediately, as you were speaking, I went back to some experiences that I've been having lately with doing our intern evaluations. So essentially it would be me, my interns, and the interns manager in the room. And I went through 17 of these. And passion is one of the things that we as Pitney Bowes employees are essentially rated on. It's one of the things, it's one of our core values. So we talk about passion a lot. And in these intern sessions, you know, the managers would say, oh, she's great or he's great, but I just can't tell if he really wants this or if she really wants to be here. And it's like she's doing the work, you know, and then, but I don't really see the passion. And so I've been thinking about that a lot because I think actually it probably is something that I've had to work on myself as well. When it comes to passion, people display it in a lot of different ways. That's something that you know. And I think the first thing is that you know that people have clearly shared that feedback with you. So at least you know that's something you have to work on. That's the first step, right? Like to get through. But I think that some things that you may want to think about is, and I hate to say this, but I really gave this fake it till you make it kind of example a lot. If it's that extra smile, if it's that intonation in your voice, you know, it's pushing yourself out of a little bit of your comfort zone just so that the other person can meet you kind of halfway. So I think that if you are, you know, making yourself smile a little bit more, kind of really like, you know, opening your eyes a little bit more, tilting your head up a little bit more, those are things that for you will probably be uncomfortable at first, and that's the fake it part. But then after a while, it's going to become your work self. You know, at home, I'm probably different than I am in the office. you know, the way that I speak, the cadence of my voice is probably a little bit more relaxed. But at work, half of it is about what you're doing, and then half of it is really about how you're doing it. And that's something that I definitely learned. This is my first, and I graduated from GW in 2012. So in class, you can kind of get points for raising your hand. At work, you have to raise your hand and then shine after you raise your hand. So I think that when it comes to passion, you may know how you feel, you know, but you have to just push yourself to convey it in a way that's kind of socially just like kind of constructed a little bit. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No. I think I totally agree with you. And I would tell you a couple of things. One, practice. Do as many informational interviews as you can. Ask a friend to interview you. Ask anybody to say. And, you know, if worse comes to worse, when you walk into an interviewer, say, I have to tell you something. I've been given the feedback that I don't come across as excited and passionate as I should be, but I really am. And I hope that I convey that to you. And sometimes by just being honest with an interviewer, they'll go, okay, he's self-aware. And that's one of the things we really look for in people. And the fact that he prepped me, that I might not come off that way. So you might go walking out of the room and you go, I'm not sure about him. But you know what? He knew enough to tell me that I wasn't going to be all that sure. And that's a good thing. So,
right.
But practice. Sit down and have your friends interview you. If you're unfortunate like my husband, marry somebody like me, he's going to interview you all the time, which is just painful for him. My kids are now going through, my son is going through college interviews. I interview them all the time, which drive me crazy. But people are happy. Just to say, I want to talk to you more about what I did last summer. How am I coming across? And practice. And then fake it. And she's right.
Fake it till you make. I mean, like, literally, passion is one of the, and I'm going to do a little bit. I was a philosophy major, so I'll try not to get too like existential, but passion is one of those intangible things, right? It's one of those things that you almost don't feel like you should have to pay attention to because you know what you can offer, right? But it's reflected in a lot of the things that we do. It's reflected in our nonverbal communication. You know, like I said, my natural stance, and it would have been way more comfortable for me to stand here for an hour like this. But would that really show that I was passionate about anything? I don't know. Maybe I don't think that it's directly, you know, related to passion, but it probably will hit at that a little bit. You know, we were talking earlier about my natural face, my resting face is a little mean. I'm not mean at all. But, you know, when I'm working at my cube, if someone walks by, I have to try to just like sit up a little taller and perk myself up a little bit because it's going to reflect. And, you know, we live in a world that has a lot to do with perception. And I think that that's something that we have to.
What's the matter?
Yeah,
nothing.
like nothing.
Nothing matter. I'm just concentrating.
But my nothing. But even when I walk by her office, I'll walk into her office, and I'm probably just like walking each office. Her immediate reaction is, "What's the matter?" And I find myself going, "Oh, nothing." You know, like my voice is higher. Like I'm smiling because I really want to show that I am passionate about what I'm doing. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but I think that it really is just about, like she said, practice and pushing yourself a little bit out of a comfort zone, if that answers it. Sure.
So now I'm in a critical career transition process. My background is all about international development. I work in United Nations and some local governments, but now I want to move to private sectors, like consulting or banking or anything like that. So how can I market myself in the resumes and interviews, because it's like totally different sectors?
Well, that's why you came back to go to graduate school, right? I mean, right? I mean, that's part of, you want to reposition yourself away from what you had done prior to coming to school, right?
But I actually spent my first year in graduate school still at university.
Okay, and now you're making the transition.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you want to put things on your resume. It's going to be hard for you to do it in a resume. It's something you're probably going to have to present your story to an individual. It's going to be hard to be able to reflect that you've made that change. But again, with self-reflection and self-awareness, what drove you to that change? What was it? You know, what was the defining moment? And to be able to speak to that to someone to say, you may not look, my first year, I decided to go in a different direction, and let me tell you why I did that. And quite frankly, if you really thought it through and it's a really good answer, you know, something that you're passionate about, that'll resonate with the person that you're interviewing with. but I would tell you, you're probably going to need to go above and beyond your resume if you're going to transition mid-cycle.
So that will hinder my chance to get into the interviews.
Well, I think you'll need to spend time going to presentations and meeting. Be sure to get in front of the individual and really talk to them. When employers come on campus, right? You have that opportunity. Make certain that you go and talk to the person that's going to be collecting your resumes, and make your point. I mean, and tell them, look, and I'm here because of this. I know that on paper, I'm not going to look the same as the next person, but let me tell you why you want to talk to me.
Right.
And do that. But I think definitely do it in person. You can find out. I mean, you can find out who's doing the resume selection from the placement office, if they'll tell you that, or you can find out in some way, send them an email and let them know. You're going to have to go a little bit above and beyond.
I think that.
I mean, don't be defeated. It's just you're going to have to make a little bit more effort. But frankly, you're probably the one they're going to remember more than the person that didn't make the effort.
Right.
So sometimes you put yourself in a better situation by having to go above and beyond.
Along those same ways, Lane with going above and beyond, probably, for you, tailoring your resume specifically to the role that you're applying for will really help. So even if it's, and sometimes when I see resumes like this, when the objective line is like to get a job at Pitney Bowes or something, I know that you just switched out the name Pitney Bowes, right? But if in your experience, when you explain your experience on paper, if you start to try to highlight within the role ways that those are transferable skills and how they transfer into the new kind of opportunities that you're looking for, you'll see that it wasn't just that she just switched out the title. She really has tailored this document to this role, and she's saying, okay, even though I did this, when I did this, this, and this, it would allow me to help with this and that kind of area, because of making the connections yourself so that the employer doesn't have to make it.
See, I've seen resumes where someone tells you what you just said, and they haven't changed their resume to reflect that change. It's
Right.
still written because their resume, they left it as a static document rather than being one that evolves over time. They've written it so, I got that great internship based upon what I was originally focused on. You probably need to go back and do the exercise that Lindsay talked about, looking at technical, functional, and the soft skills, and how it would translate into corporate versus not-for-profit, and rethink it.
Right.
That way.
So yeah, tailoring the entire thing.
I'm presuming you already did that, but I've definitely seen a number of people that don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you make the connections for the recruiter, it'll be difficult for them to
A lot
ignore.
of people who go back and who have a legal degree, go back to get another degree. And I'm like, explain this to me.
Right.
I'm not seeing a pattern here.
Right.
I'm not understanding how you ended up back in another program when you have your law degree.
Right. Does that help a little bit? Okay. Sure.
So a lot of times the first interview is usually the behavioral interview. So when you're presenting your cases, what do you think is the most logical sequence to go through?
Are you doing case interviews?
Well, not really case interviews. So when they ask you behavioral interviews, so explain a time when you had to manage, a project or something like that. What do you guys think is the most logical way to go through those experiences?
For you to answer the question?
Yeah, when you're answering.
I think this is.
I'm thinking.
I mean, I think it's telling the story, right? So if you ask me to explain a time, you tell it like a story. If you ask me to explain a time when when I worked in a team and we had a challenge and we had to work through that challenge. If I just go straight into, there was a time when, we had to meet a deadline, we couldn't meet the deadline, but we all got together and I made the schedule and then we met the deadline. It doesn't really, there's no, I don't know where you were, I don't know what you were working on, I don't know what the project was. I think that people forget the context, so I think I probably would tell it like a story. Well, it was this year and there were this many people involved and I played this role and this was a challenge and this is how we solved the challenge. I think that that's probably like the best way to present those things, and behavioral interviews are really about how you can talk about an experience that you had and how it will apply to anything else. I think people probably forget that applicable part of it. So think about why the recruiter is asking you that question rather than just answering the question, and tell a complete story behind it.
They'll teach you the breakdown of it, so you're going to say what the situation was, what your actions were, and then what the outcome was. So you're going to go through that. But it's always best is to give them a quick synopsis up front. This is what I'm going to tell you about. And again, look at the interviewer and be like, okay, yeah, this is what they're looking for. And you say, is that what you're?
Is that what you?
Am I not answering the question the way you wanted to?
Right.
And they'll probably answer. But it's good to make certain that you're setting it up the right way, that you're going through what else that you learned about it.
I think remembering that, whoever's doing an interview or whoever your manager is, they're people. So, if you have to be, in a sense, when you talk to different people, a chameleon a little bit. So we talked about this in that same workshop when we went over our personality traits. You used the example of tools, right? If I'm a hammer kind of person and everything I come interaction with, I hammer at, I'm just very aggressive or I'm very straightforward. But you're a screwdriver and I'm like, hammering at you, and that's not how you operate. Nothing I say is going to translate to you. So even when you're talking about a case, making sure that you're really making it, something that the other person can digest and giving them the full setting, I think that will really help. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? I think, and I just thought of this because I wanted to end on this, always remember, and I just left a MBA conference just this past week, always remember when you're talking to an employer that these people work at this place, they've become probably proud of where they're working at, especially if you're a recruiter, at least you're going to pretend like it. So you want to make sure that they feel as special as anyone else, right? And that you are as knowledgeable and you come to the plate like with as much information as you can, so that you can actively and accurately market to them. You know who you are, but you're going to have to kind of try on different sleeves and change, your colors depending on who you're speaking to a little bit, depending on the field that they're in, and try to make yourself and your skills as transferable as possible. Literally, there was a guy who came up to our booth just on the last day of the career fair, and we were doing kind of on-site applications. You could apply right away. We had a computer screen there set up and everything. And he sat down and he told us that he was looking for an accounting job. And he sat down on the computer and I opened it up to the accounting jobs for him, and he was kind of going through them. And then I came back and he was looking at sales roles, and I noticed that. So I asked him, are you looking for sales roles now? And we talked about that a little bit. And then he went on to his little 30-second spiel, and then I found he was kind of looking around the booth. He was like, yeah, I think I'll be a really good contributor to, and he was just looking around, and I could tell he was looking for something that had the company name on it. He's looking around, and he's like, yeah, to PW, I really think I could be a good, addition to PW. I don't know what PW is. I don't know. I guess he was thinking about PwC, but he lost track of what he was doing. He lost track of what he was looking for. He forgot what we were talking about. And so his level of marketing himself really plummeted immediately because he wasn't sure what he was bringing to the table, and he wasn't even sure what the name on the table was. And I think that really kind of, thinking about all the things we talked about today, puts it in context a little bit and how it can really come about into real life. If you don't market yourself correctly and you don't know who you're marketing yourself to, you really sell yourself short. So I hope that was a helpful session. I think we're at 2:45. I tried to be aware of 2:46. So today. So I hope that answered your questions. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to email us. I didn't put my.
We're going to be at the networking session if you guys are sticking around.
Yeah, we're going to be at the networking session, and then we're going to be back on campus for the Employment Opportunities Conference and for the Catalyst. Sorry. Yeah, for the Career Catalyst, I believe it's called, and the EOC back in October. So I hope that you all can come visit us, and I didn't put our email addresses up here, but if you need them, just come by and we'll give them to you, because we really want to make sure that we really got to what you were looking for. And if you have any feedback around what we talked about and ways that we can kind of enhance the presentation and things that we should really talk about, maybe other topics that we might want to talk about, please let us know so we can continue to improve for next year. And thanks for listening.